Elite Wrestling have announced a brand new weekly television show, Collision, and I am about to show you how AEW can use this opportunity to build towards the rivalry that we're all craving for. AEW Collision is set to launch on Saturday, June 17th, live from the United Center in Chicago, Illinois, with the Second Coming special expected to be the home of the long-awaited return of CM Punk. Ever since the news was leaked some weeks back, various reports have stated that there will be a roster split between Collision and the already established AEW Dynamite. This to not only provide more opportunities for some of the company's underutilized talents, but also as a way to relieve tensions in the locker room between those that don't necessarily get on very well, and that's putting it mildly. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at how AEW can take advantage of this volatile situation by building competition between two of its own television shows. This won't only be a battle of the brands, a war of ratings, or a clash of two sides that just don't like each other, but it's also a conflict of opposing ideologies of how wrestling should be presented. In one camp, you have the old school approach of CM Punk and FTR, heavily grounded in the elements of the territory days, who look at things a lot differently from a lot of today's generation. On the other hand, you have the Elite, whose approach has been the catalyst for an entire promotion named after them, and are often credited as pioneers of modern wrestling. However, one of the issues with AEW since its inception is that those that are more in line with the old school approach aren't fond of the likes of Orange Cassidy or the Young Bucks, which has put a lot of people off watching the shows entirely, whilst breeding an entire community built to criticize their every move. At the same time, AEW has shown that they can present what some would consider to be serious wrestling when they want to, as shown by the rivalry between MJF and CM Punk, or characters like Eddie Kingston and Samoa Joe. A roster split is the perfect opportunity for the promotion to target both audiences at the same time in order to maximize revenue through pay-per-view buys and merchandising, using AEW Dynamite to satisfy the core audience, with Collision being used as a bridge to invite the critics to give them another chance by offering two separate identities satisfying two different fan bases. So the first order of business is deciding what happens to the championship belts. For me, a promotion must only have one world championship, preventing either title from feeling diluted or second-rate. There's been no better example of this than Roman Reigns' recent run as the undisputed WWE Universal Champion, with his status as the only world champion in town, elevating not only himself but the belts entirely. This is a prestige that wasn't there when there was a WWE Championship and a Universal Championship, and I believe it's something that won't be there with the introduction of the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. Therefore, in my plan, the AEW World Championship will float between both shows depending on who the challenger is at the time, with the champion feuding with the top stars with the best win-loss records from both shows. The same applies for the Women's World Championship, which positions the top title of the female division across both shows, no matter whether you're on Collision or Dynamite. On top of this, the women's division will be far less exclusive than the men's due to a lack of depth, something that was recently reported to be the case in real life. Given the fact that AEW Dynamite airs on the TBS network, the TBS Championship should become mostly exclusive over there as their mid-card title, whilst AEW Collision becomes the home of the AEW TNT Championship. Given that the AEW Trios Championship was introduced as a belt for the Elite at the time, we'll be putting that on AEW Dynamite due to six-man matches being more fast-paced than traditional tag team matches, which also means that the World Tag Team titles land on Collision with FTR. Another title that I'd have appear on multiple shows is the International Championship, although I wouldn't necessarily make this exclusive to AEW shows. The belt should be regularly defended across all of AEW, as well as on the events of partner promotions such as Ring of Honor, New Japan Pro-Wrestling, Lucha Libre AAA, and beyond, allowing for international stars like Kazuchika Okada or El Hijo del Vikingo to pick up the strap and defend it across the world, whilst making cameo appearances on Collision, Dynamite, and Rampage. Perhaps we could even have the title make more appearances on Dynamite than anywhere else due to a lack of mid-card men's title, with the TNT belt being exclusive to Collision. As a quick note, before we get into the roster themselves, Rampage likely will and should be used as a showcase of up-and-coming talent or independent wrestling stars as a bridge between Ring of Honor and both AEW main shows, meaning that we won't be considering it as part of a roster split. AEW AEW have too many wrestlers to mention everybody by name in this video, although we're going to be taking a look at 3 key categories for each show: the key players, the teams, whether it be trios or tag teams, and the main eventers. As we discussed earlier, the women's division will be far more open to going back and forth, therefore we won't be doing any drafting there, but we will be bringing in Mercedes Moné from the free agency market for the first episode of Collision, setting up an eventual debut match at the Boston Garden Dynamite on July 19th. But with that said, let's get into the split. First, we'll start with the key players for AEW Dynamite. Bandido feels like the perfect fit for the aforementioned fast-paced action that we're looking for with the show, as does Jungle Boy, Sammy Guevara, Orange Cassidy, Keith Lee, despite his size, Swerve Strickland, and Konosuke Takeshita. The key players on Collision should be Hook, Powerhouse Hobbs, Brian Cage, Darby Allin, Miro, Ricky Starks, and Malachi Black. All of these have an element of an old school wrestling vibe, perhaps apart from Darby Allin, which should make him stand out within the division. As for the trios that make it onto Dynamite, of course the Young Bucks should be on the show, and they can find a partner within Kenny Omega or Hangman Page or someone like that to finish off the 3-man team. We'll put the Blackpool Combat Club on the show, which is rumored to be happening. The Undisputed Elite can also land on Dynamite, this being Adam Cole, Roderick Strong, and Kyle O'Reilly whenever he returns, the Death Triangle, the Jericho Appreciation Society, and the Hardys and Isaiah Cassidy, and then Mark Quinn once he returns, creating a 4-man team. FTR, of course, should be on Collision. The Guns as well feel like old school heels. The House of Black land on Dynamite, following Malachi Black, who makes it into the key players category, which creates a tag team of Buddy Matthews and Brody King. Jay Lethal and Jeff Jarrett, of course, land on Collision, which feels like a natural fit given the circumstances. The Acclaimed and La Faction Ingo Bernable, with their main team being Rush and Andrade El Idolo. As for the main eventers, of course, Dynamite will be headed by Kenny Omega, followed up by Jon Moxley, who joins the rest of the Blackpool Combat Club. Adam Cole, who we discussed earlier as part of the Undisputed Elite. He can kind of move back and forth between singles and a trio. Of course, Chris Jericho, the leader of the Jericho Appreciation Society, comes in as a main eventer. Bryan Danielson, who I do feel does fit on Collision, but since we need to keep a certain member of the Blackpool Combat Club away from CM Punk, we'll put him on Dynamite for now, maybe moving him across should they break up at some point. And then of course Hangman Page for obvious reasons. Then CM Punk will of course head up AEW Collision, which is pretty much expected at this point, with him wanting to feud with Samoa Joe, who will also put on the Collision brand. Jay White should also be a main eventer, joined by Juice Robinson, which does make a team, but I do feel like he should be a singles, at least for now. Maybe we can bring in somebody else to join Bullet Club Gold to create a tag team with Robinson, maybe Tama Tonga or somebody like that who currently finds himself on the free agency market. Eddie Kingston should also main event on Collision, as well as MJF, who of course is the AEW World Champion, meaning at least for now he will float between shows, but if he does eventually drop the belt, he should join CM Punk on Collision to maybe continue their rivalry going forward. As well as that, speaking of MJF's rivals, we're going to add Wardlow as a main eventer. This of course a natural fit given that he's the AEW TNT champion, and moving him to the TNT network makes a whole lot of sense, and we can continue the MJF Wardlow feud somewhere down the line. Perhaps he could even be the man to beat him. As for how we progress into the feud involving the Elite, CM Punk and FTR, I think it makes sense to keep them apart for as long as possible, perhaps until the Young Bucks and Omega have signed new contracts with the company, before letting things cool down a little bit between them, with the roster split adding a level of realism regarding the heat between them. And it's likely that it is actually the reason they're apart as well. Maybe 6 months, 9 months down the line, the Elite are competing in a trios match on AEW Dynamite. This before CM Punk and FTR enter through the crowd Outsiders style, taking them out, setting up a feud between Collision and Dynamite, perhaps leading to the recruitment of other stars from their own shows, leading to a War Games, or should we say Blood and Guts, and even that Kenny Omega versus CM Punk singles match, and the third and final match between the Young Bucks and FTR for FTR's tag team titles. But let me know what you would do with the future of All Elite Wrestling given the major news that has been announced down in the comments below.